Welcome to Season 2 of OnListening. This is your host, Daniel Rosen. Thank you for joining us as we continue to explore listening in all its dimensions. Continue listening after the interview is over for some information about engagement with the show. Thank you. On the next episode of OnListening, I'm so excited to have Dr. Judi Brownell, Professor of Hotel Management, I think it is, at the S.C. Johnson School of Business at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Thank you. Did I get the name of the school right?
You did. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good.
And Dr. Brownell, Judi is the author of a textbook on listening, which is entitled Listening, Attitudes, Principles, and Skills. And I'm looking at the 5th edition of what must be a remarkably successful textbook covering a model of understanding listening.
It's been used in classes all over the world. And actually, I have the 7th edition was just out. So I think it's, teachers have found that it's useful. Sometimes it's hard to teach listening. Everyone knows it's important. But I have vivid recollection of when I was observing teachers in a classroom in a high school, and it was going to be put on the New York State Regents. And the teacher just didn't know how to begin to help students listen. And she would just shout louder and louder. Now, next time, listen. You've got to listen. And I knew there must be something more than that we could do to help students learn to listen.
I have read 2/3 of this book, and I am struck by the comprehensiveness of the model, the Hurrier model, which we're going to talk about. And since I've started this podcast, I've been doing more reading and watching videos about listening. And I come from a mental health background. I'm a psychotherapist and sex therapist. And so I think that maybe it's just my own hubris, but I think that we in the field of therapy think that we're pretty good listeners, or at least we have some idea of it. And what I've been seeing come out of the business world is just incredibly impressive. I am really, especially the chapters on empathy and evaluating, fantastic material.
Well, I think that people who go into therapy, social work, the helping professions, anyone who's attracted to those professions, I think they really have a genuine interest in people, and that certainly helps them listen. We have what we call the law of listening, and that just the letters stand for listening ability equals not only ability, but willingness. So we find a lot of listening variation in terms of how much energy and effort someone puts into the listening process. So you can, meet people who say they'd like to become better listeners, but unless they genuinely try harder to listen well, there's no amount of training that's going to change their behavior. So in some ways, it's a good thing because it's just being more conscious of it and being more motivated to listen well, gives you another 30% boost on your actual outcomes.
Yes.
In the things that I do, I find that, listening is a part of everything I do. And I hadn't realized that when I first got started. I was in a business school and I was asked to do some listening training at electric and gas company because they had done a needs assessment. And while the managers rated themselves really, really highly, thought they listened really well, the employees indicated that was their primary complaint about management, is the management didn't listen. And so they called me in to try to help fix that problem. And I learned a couple of interesting things. One is that people tend to overestimate how well they listen. So the managers were saying, I listen, I have no problem with that at all. I don't know, why I'm here for this training. And it was only when I showed them the means of the ratings that their employees gave them, that they suddenly were like, oh my gosh, other people are, not thinking I listen that well. So the model actually developed because different employees were really using the term she doesn't listen, meaning very different things. So in some cases, it would be that they don't follow through on what they promised to do. So they say he wasn't listening, or they aren't giving them good nonverbals. And so you could have an open door policy, but as soon as an employee comes in and starts talking, they start thumbing through folders. And so it was an interesting process that I went through in developing the model. And
you're the mother of the Hurrier model?
I am the mother of the Hurrier model, and it's probably still the only, or not, it's one of the very few ways in which we can operationalize listening. It's a fairly comprehensive listening model that can be used for almost any purpose. In fact, I'm now looking at the professions, listening in the professions, and I just had another book come out called The Listening Advantage, and it helps lawyers and leaders and healthcare professionals, all sorts of different groups. But in my work in other areas, I've found that listening I did a lot with women's career development. Listening played a role there. I'm really interested and have been doing a lot in service skills, customer service skills. I mean, that is all about listening. And my background, I have some background in social work also.
Oh, good.
In my first life, I did some counseling and realized how important it was there.
Well, us therapists, we're in the service delivery business.
Yes.
Yeah,
sure. It's appreciated for sure. But,
to reflect on what you said, to meet someone who the span of their career to reach back and to go back way back to social work, and then to being confronted with a problem. You were confronted with a problem. How do I get these guys to understand that they're not coming across the way they want to? How could I make this accessible so you increase in the responsivity? So they had to listen to you, essentially. You had to present a model that was entertainable for them to be able to grow and become better listeners themselves. And it's an impressive thing to start with a hard problem and then have your career trajectory move to solving and expanding the dimensions of that. It's
I'm just really happy that I could do something that people have found valuable, because not only is it used in education, but a lot of researchers have also used the model in all sorts of contexts to find out more about the listening process. And the only thing that's upsetting is that still many universities and certainly high schools don't have any instruction devoted specifically to listening. It's always about, and people's concern seems always still to be about, how am I coming across? What are people going to think of what I say? And in my book, as you know, but one of the other contributions I think I made was I would start the whole communication process from listening, not from speaking. So unless you listen well, you don't know what to say. You don't understand the person well enough to know, what they're interested in, or what they need to know, or what's going to motivate them, or what's going to be useful to them. So I think it's really important that people think about the challenge of listening, and also realize that it takes actually more energy to listen well than it does to speak. You can just rattle on and on and on, but a good listener really is using a lot of concentration and energy in order to process the information that they're hearing.
So just a couple of references to previous podcasts. My most recent guest, Herb Smith, a musician, basically said that as a musician, a performing musician, 50% of what he's doing is listening to the other musicians so that he's tracking them and syncing with them, which sounds a little parallel to what you talked about in conversation. A major portion of listening is the responsivity part, to guide and elicit the information that you want to get from the speaker. Mm-hmm. And then regarding the idea that a manager is a good listener, So psychotherapy has the same problem, and my guest Scott Miller talked extensively about that. And there's a tremendous volume of research that therapists tend to overestimate their efficacy as well, and that the currently in the field of psychotherapy, according to the International Center of Clinical Excellence, the only really method to get better is to deliberately practice skills that you're weak in. And I'd say about 10% of your textbook is devoted to classroom and extra classroom activities that students would practice. So my hunch is that not only when people take your class do they learn about listening, but they are fundamentally more qualitatively better listeners.
Absolutely. That's definitely my goal, is not to have them learn the principles in theory in out of context. I would really like them to become better listeners. And I can just quickly go through some of the clusters of the model. An acronym HURIER stands for, and I always wished that I had not made the H hearing, but attention. The first thing you have to do is just get people's attention. And in social contexts in particular, often we say, oh, I've forgotten someone's name, or I didn't hear this. It's because, you really weren't focusing on it in the first place. And I think selecting what you're going to focus on, knowing what's important in a context, is particularly important. I think people have a lot of distractions, a lot on their mind. The things that distract certainly are internal as well as external. And being able to minimize those so that you can, capture the information that you need is takes practice and takes focus. I think that, as I said, that takes energy as well to keep concentrating. Different studies have shown that, you have 7 minute, a 7 minute lapse, that you can listen for 7 minutes and then you have to kind of regroup a little bit and then listen for another 7 minutes. And so you do get tired and just, automatically kind of refresh every once in a while. But unless that process happens, there's nothing else that's going to, give you the information you need if you haven't focused on it in the first place.
I like that. It makes so that 7 minutes actually feels very relaxing to me, because I don't like the feeling of wanting to slow people down, but I think it's true. You get like a backlog. Like, I'm aware that as I ask you this question, it not only gives me the chance to ask the question, but it sort of lets the audience's brain parse the information that you said and filter it through, so it doesn't run over the cup, but it maybe goes through the funnel. And I love your, as we see, we're having an ASL interpretation. So I love your statement about the use of the word hearing, that you really wish you sort of have the idea that it would be better named grabbing attention in some way, or something like, yeah.
You have to hear, definitely. You have to be able to hear, but it's really about paying attention. It's really about a choice that you have about focusing. And
right. And so there's some of our audience that hears with their eyes. And that's what I've learned about ASL, is hearing with your eyes, in a sense.
So then the U stands for understanding.
Yep.
And that can be, in all ways. Sometimes if you're speaking with someone who's making assumptions about what you know, or it could be cultural differences that, make understanding more difficult, just plain old comprehension. But it is a part of the process of listening, is making sure you understand what the other person said. Remembering isn't really, memory, the work in memory is a separate body of literature and research. But if you don't remember what you hear, people perceive that you haven't listened. So your ability to remember and to follow through on what what someone tells you is part of what they are expecting, and part of what I think the listener's responsibility is to their partner.
Mm-hmm. I find that my memory has gotten better as a sort of professional listener, but sometimes it's just off and it is hard to listen with.
Yeah, and in fact, you're saying that people, I have students come in all the time, and I have to write down what they say. So the next time when they come in, I know that they've got 4 brothers, and I know they live in Idaho. Yeah. And but that's a real compliment to them. They think they feel that they were listened to and that they're important to you. So I find that the memory is really a part of the relational process, that when you don't remember, it's like, what was your name? Where did you live? Oh, you told me that before. I know I asked the same question, last week when you came in. So really the memory has a lot to do with building the relationship and communicating that what they have to say was important. So you remember that.
Yes. Okay. And then what's next?
One is interpreting, which is what you were saying, listening with your eyes. That's huge. Gender differences still. We doing some studies, but women tend to just give a lot more nonverbals, facially, have better eye contact. If you just watch 2 men talking, it's unusual for them to maintain close eye contact. Usually one's looking right, one's looking left. And reading facial expressions is important to really communicate a lot facially. I always tell the students, if I were holding up a mirror in front of the classroom here, do you know what I'm seeing when I look out at you? Do you know whether, you're looking like you're paying attention?
Right.
Listening to what I have to say. The affect is an important component. And certainly if you want someone to speak to you, your nonverbals in having that sense of openness and interest goes a long way. Now, in the service field, and when I work with managers, when we talk about the front desk attendants and people who have a lot of interface with customers, they need to look like they're listening regardless. They don't really have the option of if they're bored or upset, they don't have the option of playing those emotions out in this particular setting. And so we run into the problem of, how much do you fake listening when you're not listening or when you don't want to listen, and how authentic is that and how ethical is that? But part of the job is what they call emotional labor, really.
Yes.
So part of the job is looking at the way that a customer expects you to look if they have your attention and they're important to you. So that all the EQ that people are talking about, emotional intelligence, is very important in listening. And men need to kind of find out whether or not they need to work a little bit more, especially on the eye contact. I think that's a huge gender differential still. Doesn't mean they're not listening well. And that's the thing. I don't mean to imply that men don't listen as well. If you look at the essence of listening as hearing what you have to say, understanding what you have to say, that it's the feeling, it's the perception of being listened to.
Am I remembering there were some cultural differences too around eye contact?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because anything you might learn or think about in the nonverbal communication all have cultural implications. And in different cultures, eye behavior is different. Posture, the distance away that you move, what we call proxemics, how far away you are when you talk. I mean, in a counseling situation, if you put the person you're counseling far away at the other end of the room, even the things they feel comfortable saying are affected by the fact that there's a lot of distance. And on the other hand, there are certainly people who culturally just are closer together when they speak and feel comfortable being much closer than an American generally is. So all sorts of nonverbals. And, you don't even want to get into like the sign language and the learned behaviors that are so very different culturally.
Yeah. Right. Was there a particular, I'm trying to remember now, I wish I remembered there. I think there was one particular cultural difference you highlighted in the book that I thought was particularly, I mean, that's two editions ago, so I don't know if it's migrated to editions.
The Asian cultures are the ones that, where they have a lot of things we attribute to cultural differences, and we try without stereotyping to at least change expectations. So your expectation would be, in an Asian culture, they tend to be actually better listeners. They do listen before they speak. When I do a lot of leadership skills, team dynamics, and find that one difference, and this is a little tangent, but I think it's important and interesting, is that the Asian students tend to own what they say a whole lot more than Americans, at least. We tend to brainstorm and we just throw ideas out there, no matter how poorly formulated they might be. But some of the Asian students that we find really are much more thoughtful, so they don't speak as much. So what happens is the topic just moves on, and so they end up not participating as the quality of their participation is probably higher, but the amount of their participation isn't as great because they have held back a little bit more and have done more listening and more thoughtful, like analysis, synthesis, in the situation.
Right. It must feel like a hailstorm of Caucasian opinions. Because I do, when you said that, this idea of that brainstorming out loud, I have noticed that in myself, and it's always trouble. It's great when you're right, but then when you want to modify your position and backtrack, then it gets really complicated. Well, I don't know if I was really saying that. I probably said that with more force than I meant. And
right, it's hard. In fact, that is one thing that I think is really fascinating about communication is you can never really take it back. I mean, particularly if it's something about a person, and say you look really, you look really pale and anemic in that outfit, and then go, oh no, that's not true. I really, they've always got it in their head. So I think that, in some situations, caution about speaking, but in other situations, problem solving, and a lot of the, what happens is, in going into the next HURIE, the E is evaluating, and you were just mentioning some things in counseling that I thought really, although you think a counselor would need to focus more attention on the interpreting, on the nonverbals, on looking like they're open to whatever someone's saying, to making the other person feel comfortable, to getting the right distances, to maintaining good eye contact doesn't mean staring. It means just comfortable eye contact. You'd think that would be the main concern, but actually the E for evaluating that, to do a good job, I would think in counseling, you would need to not have a lot of assumptions, make a lot of assumptions about a person, or judge, being non-judgmental, to listening before you make judgments or suggestions or help them merge solutions together. So I think that in counseling, I did some therapy for a while, a long time ago, but one of the problems I had was I just wanted to keep giving my opinion about things.
Yes, right. The right.
So that's why I went to teaching, is I'm always giving my opinion.
Writing reflex. We want to fix. We do. We go in. We want to fix.
I want to fix quickly, and if I see something, I want to say it. And so I do think that we have to admire good therapists for their ability to get to a goal without blurring out something themselves, but to help lead someone to looking at alternatives, exploring alternatives, kind of finding their own solutions.
Was contexting part of the evaluating process, or was that more of an outside, external to the Hurrier? I think I'm going to put a graphic up from you. Can I put a graphic up of the model in the description? So the context is very important, because I think evaluating is not just what someone said, but why did they say it? Why are they telling me this? I think that was part of the evaluating portion, which was really helpful, because I think there's sometimes a dark side of listening where a listener is overly influenced by another person. And you talk about propaganda. Am I in the same chapter with you? Being able to identify propaganda and all
the propaganda techniques. I think that that sometimes people don't have confidence in their, I think the processes are not always conducive to getting to good solutions. One is that people don't seek out information that contradicts their previously held beliefs. So I think you need to deliberately try to expose yourself to to new ideas, to talk with people who have different perspectives, who come from different backgrounds, so that you have a broader range of options when you think about where you stand and what your position is on a particular issue. Because usually people have in their heads what they think is their position, and they're not listening to change it. They're just listening for the other person to take a breath so they can get their ideas in. So you've got two people, and I'd be interested in your next your next interviewee, because when you come from different perspectives, that really is so I've got some great arguments and I can't wait to share them, and so you're not really listening to change. You're not asking questions. There's a great activity that you have to paraphrase what someone comes on two different sides of the issue, and when you hear the opposing view, you can't give your position until you've paraphrased and questioned the person, and then you can give your position. And people just say, "Oh, I'm afraid I'm going to forget what I'm going to say," and it's like, good. If you forget, maybe it's because you've been convinced a little bit or changed or modified what you were going to say. So
is that I've asked this in previous episodes. Isn't that a vulnerability in really good listening? Is we might be persuaded or want to give up a belief. We might find ourselves influenced by new information. And so there's a vulnerability and a potential so on the front end, it can feel threatening. On the back end, it can feel relieving. Oh God, that's not true. But on the front end, it can feel threatening. Like, if I really listen to you, am I going to be able to hold on to my truth?
Mm-hmm. And both people come in thinking they're right. I mean, I think there's a right and that they have it.
Yes.
And, so I think that, it is difficult. And even people who believe they're open-minded, there are topics and areas, they're hot, hot topics that they feel so strongly about. When it's linked with values, then there's probably no change, because those are two different types of conversation. One is, if you talk about abortion, people are linked to abortion by their values. And so that's not going to be readily changed. If you take another topic on, what's the best way to, keep the environment, then you can perhaps change their mind that this is or isn't true.
Right. So where are we on the acronym? HURIE, and the last one is just people do judge your listening by your response. So I keep the speaking as part of the model, and I think that then that takes you back to communicating yourself, but you started with listening. So, and it's not, as you said, with the graphic model, it's not exactly linear. You're doing things simultaneously, and as you're listening, as you're speaking, you're also listening. Hopefully you're looking at the feedback that you're getting and modifying what you say accordingly. So even the listening during speaking is important. Well, good. I'm glad you got to get through all that, and we still have some more time. There's also some other parts sort of above, like there's some other external components of the model. Maybe if they're off the tip of your tongue, we could list those. About context, I think, or there's some other attitudes people have when they come in. I probably have it because I got the book right here.
Yeah, I'm cheating too because...
Good.
The context and all aspects of the context.
Organizational role, attitudes, previous experience, values, bias, right.
Anything that influences how someone perceives the situation is going to be there. And this was kind of a business context, but your purpose also, your context is really important. You listen differently. if you were in a, well, we always say, I teach a lot in the graduate programs, and we're just amazed, these people who have, managed teams and done amazing things. When they get to be a student, their listening changes completely as a student, and their role and the questions they ask. So, that's the one that's most vivid to me on an ongoing basis, is imagining them in the job they came from, when they have a lot of credibility and they're very on top of things and they're observing things. And then they get to be a student. And then they're just sitting there drinking their coffee, looking at you going, entertain me, give me some reasons to listen.
Not as active a listener. Right.
But I mean,
that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Any bias that you come in with, and in your motivation. I think motivation is particularly important. That, as I said, the law of listening, if you're highly motivated, it's going to help. But the other piece I think that's important is that if you are stressed, your listening automatically plummets, and really any emotion will affect your listening negatively. So if I'm really excited, I'm not going to listen as well. If I'm really upset about something or angry, emotions tend to interfere with listening process. And it kind of stands to reason, but anything that's upsetting is going to. So actually, when people are in conflict and, you're trying to talk to somebody and they're, upset in a business context, it would be a manager talking to an employee who had a upsetting experience. Sometimes they're just not ready to listen. Sometimes it means that you have to give them time to kind of settle in. And other times, and you might find this more, they're really upset and they really need to talk. So yeah. I think your sensitivity to where they are in that process is important.
I love it.
And then your purpose is also important. Your purpose is part of the mix. That if I just want to be entertained, I'm not listening as well as, if I am listening and I need that information, if it's instructions to go somewhere. But I know myself, I get lost easily. If I'm in a car and I need to make an appointment and I'm totally lost in this new city and I stop and ask someone for directions, I have a hard time. I mean, I really have a hard time remembering what they said, because I'm flustered that I'm not there on time and I've only got a few minutes and I don't want them to take long telling me because I need to get going. But so all of that matters, as does time of day, as does, your physical setting, how comfortable you are, how many other people are present. And the last thing that I addressed in the book, the only thing you really missed was there's a lot more on ethics and there's a lot more on listening in the age of technology. And boy, after COVID and all the distance Zooming, I think that there's a lot more we can learn and say about the listening process.
Well, just to be a little timely with this, do you have any provisional conclusions about listening through Zoom and FaceTime? Is there anything that are the researchers getting some generalizations about differences?
Not a lot of studies have been reported yet. My own just observation is that actually it is very, it takes a lot of energy. People are exhausted at the end of the day from having lots of Zoom meetings. And I'm not sure why. I think you don't have all the other cues that kind of help you get through the day. And when you're on Zoom, you're on Zoom. I mean, I just got up to get the book and felt kind of rude. So if you've got an hour Zoom meeting, a little break and another hour Zoom meeting, I mean, you're really on the whole hour in a way that, that is more intense perhaps than other ways. But then, of course, in terms of listening, you miss a lot of, what's going on. It's almost too like in theater, you can see the other people in the room, and you almost feel like you have to stay non-verbally focused, because if someone begins to look totally distracted when they're just there in one of the little little squares, it looks like they've kind of left the meeting, almost like they're reading a newspaper in front of someone. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting things that are going to come, I think, of the technology, but for relationships, it's certainly there's no way it can build relationships and rapport in the same way that a handshake would.
Yeah. And in some ways, I found it pretty effective. I can simulate a closeness by being close to the camera that is pretty close if we were in real life.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Everything has gone there. The telehealth appointments, you've got your counselors, you've got your physicians, you've got your educators, you've got your service person. I mean, it's just the world really suddenly moved to Zoom.
So now I'm just thinking about my response. So you talked about all these ways that Zoom is distancing, and I came back with a statement about how in some ways I can feel close, and realizing that maybe, does that come across as not having heard you? That
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I was, like I said, I was giving my opinion. I don't know. Maybe, there are a lot of personal factors that might also explain the differences in people's perceptions of it. It's certainly better than a telephone call, for sure, seeing someone. I mean, if you take a phone call and then you take Zoom, I mean, there's a huge difference. But you take Zoom and then you take, you take in-person contact, and I think there's nearly as much. But too, I imagine it's what you get used to. I mean, I think that, younger adults or kids might not notice any difference at all because they're so used to getting information from the screen. Yes. So I would almost think age would have a little bit of difference in your comfort level and in how satisfying that is. I mean, so that I think it would be better in education than in counseling, because counseling, you really need more of that personal relationship. In education, you want the relationship, but the content is that you're imparting, really, you could do on a video.
But I think that a lot of college students, the law of listening might not apply as well, in that there's sometimes less motivation to participate in every class, and some classes are super exciting. I bet, like, I was wishing I could take your class on listening, but other classes are less exciting. And so if you're not highly motivated, then even though all the material is available on Blackboard or some other tool, are you going to go grab it? Mm-hmm. Are you going to feel motivated to go get it?
Right. And then too, you have people that get their information best verbally, and you get people who want to see printed pages and diagrams. And so, you've got just so many individual factors that will affect things. And it will be interesting to see what the researchers come out with and what studies are done this whole time period where we are using technology more. I don't think that the education will ever go back to the way it was. I don't think we'll ever be the same. I think that both faculty and students find it blended. I think it will be largely blended, and because there's so many things that you can do online and resources available at a touch, and I think we will find that there are better ways to do what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. Technology enhances our lives in many ways, and so just parsing out what's helpful and what's less. Some people, So tell me, you developed this model, you teach about it, you're actively expanding who your audience is. I think you mentioned coming to a book for attorneys. What little tidbits or special treats do you have? A particular opinion or thought or finding or thing that is intriguing to you about listening to share?
I shared a couple of them. I think that it's just intriguing that motivation is so very important in listening. Mm-hmm. I think that, if you don't care, you're not going to listen well, no matter what else happens. And so motivation is huge. I think that we're going to learn a whole lot more about there's a lot less listening in some ways because we no longer use the phone calls. It's so much of the texting, so much of the email. affects what we call listening, that is, in redefining what listening means to a generation that's growing up with the technology. Yeah. And I don't think we've really done that yet, but, we really have to take a look at what it does to the interpersonal listening that so much other communication is done remotely, and the role that listening plays. I think that that it would be nice to try to have young people realize how important listening is, and to give it the attention that they give to speaking and reading and writing. Of the language arts, listening is by far and away the least, has the least focus in educational settings. And even parents who worry about how their children speak and worry about listening in terms of the physical, can they hear, but don't prep them as much, don't focus as much, don't reward them as much for being a good listener.
Yeah.
And maybe they do now.
I feel it was underdeveloped in my training. It was almost implicit, the idea that if you're a therapist, we tweak it a little bit how to listen, but to deliberately practice learning how to listen, or to have the pleasure of a model which breaks it down into sub-skills. I've been doing this for many years, and I found the model very confirming of some things and expansive in some ways of just a cognitive understanding of what I'm doing.
The other context that I find really fascinating is healthcare. And I am the kind of director of training for a in-home senior living company, and just listening to seniors and the changes as you age in your listening, both cognitively and just contextually is really important. And we're all going to be confronting that. So I think the more we know what to expect in listening and memory will help us through those periods as well.
Which one of the things that's going to happen? I know the memory part's already going to go. Got that.
And I think that in healthcare, there's some really fascinating things, because when you approach a physician, they are listening for particular things usually. There's a spectrum, but, you have things you want to say and they have things they want to hear. And that needs to be negotiated in a very short amount of time, because usually you are really time bound. And, the physician wants you to tell them A, B, C, what they need to know in order to make a diagnosis, when, you have all these other things that are bothering you or important to you that you may,
right.
find. So that's going to be really interesting. And that too is where people who are ill really need to be heard.
Right. Did I see you just got, was that your cell phone vibrating?
It was. It's on.
It's on vibrate. We had a great example of a distraction affecting listening.
Yes, really. I'm like, and I looked over with my husband. I'm like, oh, okay, he can wait. I was like, Gary Brownell on the top there.
Right.
One of the things that we had talked about earlier was, how people can begin to improve listening. And I think that just taking one small thing that you realize you could improve upon, like interrupting. I tend to interrupt, and you interrupt certain people, and sometimes you interrupt in certain contexts, and sometimes you interrupt in certain roles. But if there is a specific situation where you're just trying to work on that behavior, that's plenty for a week or so. And if you can get a partner, someone who can help you, someone that you can say, I'm really trying to interrupt less, could you give me a sign when I begin to do that too much? I think you can, begin to work on that. If, I don't have as strong eye contact as I might like, you can work on that. So if I come across as being really judgmental, if you don't think I heard everything you had to say before I came back with my point of view, let me know, or try to catch those one at a time things. And that's why in the book there's a self-assessment where you can answer some questions honestly, because you don't need to show it to anybody. And then, just look at how you perceive your own listening. And while you might think you're great in everything, there might be something that dips a little bit. And that would be a good thing to start with.
Yeah, I'm going to just flash this up on the screen. This is the 5th edition textbook. So to go back to your statements, just because I appreciate you making sure we get to all the things that I wanted to get to by offering some sort of little at-home tasks the audience can use. And the first example you gave was to try to, I think you were suggesting that if a person has a desire to be a person who interrupts less, that they could tell somebody in their life, they could identify specific people or times in their life that they want to work on interrupting less, and then elicit feedback in order to be effective in not interrupting. And I think that those kinds of things require a context. If you just change your behavior with somebody and you're not attuning them to give you the responsive feedback that's letting you know if you're effective or not, or they may wonder what's wrong with you. Like, why you've done this for 12 years of marriage and now you're not going to, what's going on? So,
so listen, I mean, that's true. I teach some assertive skills and clearly if someone wants to practice being more assertive, it's disruptive to all their friends and family as it is to that. It's like, wait a minute. No, I don't expect that from you. So soliciting help, someone who can kind of ease you into it. Maybe you change jobs and, some other skill is required. But even simple things for yourself, like eliminating distractions and, in a classroom, you have to sit closer and, just silly things, pull the shades on the windows if you're tempted to look out. Or, I think that if someone thinks about it, almost everyone can think of a couple things that they could do to improve their listening rather than just throwing up their hands and saying, I don't listen very well. I mean, there are things, very, very simple things that you can do. And there are books on memory, which I think is one of the skills that you can never go wrong by improving memory because it helps you in so many different ways.
You can improve memory. Eric Anders, who just recently passed away, the sort of father of deliberate practice and whose research led to the idea that 10,000 hours of practice leads to mastery, helped develop his theory by people trying to get better at memorizing, and they exceeded their expectations. Just 5 hours of practicing memory, they remember so much better. It's so I'm loving listening to you talk about the specific skills and you didn't say it directly, but to have a growth mindset. If you want to make a change, you simply choose a targetable goal and practice it.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes people too readily attribute a personality or a style and say, well, I'm just not a good listener. I'm not the kind of person who can listen very well. And I think just, in counseling and education, it's all about positive change. So I think that helping, individuals to listen more effectively and getting them motivated to see the benefits of listening more effectively and to encourage them and to help them get some self-efficacy around their ability to improve. Because I think that good listeners, and the only downside I've ever seen is sometimes people listen so well that everybody wants to talk with them and they don't get anything else done. It's like, we'll tell Sherry. And then and so sometimes they need to protect themselves because you listen well. And that just shows how much it's needed that people, once they find a good listener, that person is popular everywhere because I think people need to share, need to talk, need to have someone validate their thoughts. And that's a real powerful.
It is. It really is. But they need to take your assertiveness skills training. Well, it's a little, the listening, we can do too much of it or we can listen to the wrong people. And we're not going to have time to get into that too much. But well, I am thrilled to have you. I love the recap and be able to particularly ask you some questions and what you notice. And I really want to thank you for being on the show. Any reflections on this experience for you?
Well, I think it's always fun to, kind of go over things and share thoughts. You always get some kind of new thoughts, new ways of putting things together, whenever you talk about something. So as I said, usually I cover listening in the context of some other content. So it's either service or, training caregivers or, so that the specific need, which kind of brings back the idea that everyone needs to listen no matter, what their position. I think listening is always something that humans need to.
Did you have an affiliation with the International Listening Association?
Oh, yeah, I've been president. I have had every office in the Listening Association. It is a absolutely phenomenal group of people. They will drop everything and talk to you, help you, share materials. They're podcasts all the time, and they're just really caring people whose mission is seriously just to help everyone recognize the importance of listening and to listen more effectively. And they're very collaborative, and the expertise among the combined membership is extraordinary. And they come from different fields. I mean, they come from speech and hearing, from theater, from medicine, from education, from counseling, from all different professions. So it's a very diverse group.
Great. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And yes, I'll be interested in listening to future podcasts.
I'd be honored if you did. And I'm interested in how to take a class of yours without commuting to Cornell. Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank our interpreter, Nikki. Thank you for being part of the show. And that concludes another episode from Season 2 of OnListening. Thank you for joining us. Please check out our webpage, onlistening.net, and subscribe. Please leave reviews on your favorite podcasting site. It helps me make a name for this. I don't have corporate sponsorship, and all my guests are providing their time free, so there's no way to advertise this program other than word of mouth and your ratings. Email me comments or questions, dan@onlistening.net. Thank you so much for joining again. Take care.